What's up everyone? My name is Kelsey. Welcome back to my channel. It's finally April, so that means it's time to talk about all the books I read in March. I'm having a beer again today. This is the Urban Artifact, the Gadget. It's like a fruity sour. It's pretty good. This month I read a total of 9 adult books and 2 young adult books. So I'll go ahead and get into the books. First I'll talk about 1DNF, which was Educated by Tara Westover. I picked this up from the library as an ebook, and if you're not familiar, it's an adult nonfiction memoir book about a woman who grew up in rural, I think it was Idaho, with an abusive family and no education, and it's her story about how she got away from that environment and managed to become educated anyways. I didn't make it very far. I just thought the narrative was really choppy and broken, and I couldn't get a good grasp of the timeline at all, and I just wasn't enjoying it, and I didn't look forward to picking it up. So first book I finished was Paper Girls by Brian K. Vaughan. If you watched my unhaul, you already know what I thought of this. This is an adult sci-fi graphic novel about a group of 4 girls, paper delivery girls, that stumble upon some sort of mystery in their town while they're on their paper route and investigate. The pros of this comic is that I love the illustrations. There's some full-page ones. I love the colors, and it's a pretty diverse cast of characters. The cons of this is that these are 12-year-old girls in this comic, and they don't act like 12-year-old girls. They don't act like 12-year-olds at all, even boys. Plot was super confusing. It jumped around a lot. There was a lot of panels where characters are speaking another language and you just have no idea what they're saying. And it happened often enough that I was like, it would be really helpful to know what was going on here. There's also, one of the girls is a little homophobic, and it's kind of addressed, like another girl calls her out on it, but man, I don't want to read a bunch of that. So yeah, I'm unhauling this, and I'm definitely not going to finish the series. I only gave this 2 stars. Next up was Queens of Geek by Jen Wilde, and I listened to this as an audiobook for my library. It's a young adult contemporary about 3 friends that all travel from Australia to go to a Comic-Con in California, the LA area. The book takes place over 2 or 3 days, so it's super fast paced, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars, and the pros are that there was like super squishy, adorable romances between 2 of our main characters, and then our 3rd main character and a different character whose perspective we don't get. And of the 2 romances, one of them, girl, is bisexual, so it's a female-female romance. Another thing I apparently love is reading about Comic-Cons. I really love Comic-Cons, and I like to go to them whenever I can. And it's just super fun to read about them. And I loved all the discussions about like geek community. If you're on BookTube, or you follow BookTube, or you're part of Book Twitter at all, then you have a good idea of what this is about. So I really love reading about communities like that. In addition to bisexual rep, there was also anxiety and ASD rep, autism spectrum disorder rep. The anxiety rep was really well done. I don't have ASD, so I can't speak on that. And I loved all the super positive messages about self-acceptance. Overall, just like a really good, happy, cute book. Put me in a good mood, and I gave it 4 stars. Next is The Invisible Orientation and Introduction to Asexuality by, I didn't write it down, by Julie Sandra Decker. So this is an adult nonfiction book about asexuality. I read this as an ebook from my library. Pros are, it's a really solid foundation if you don't know anything about asexuality. It would be really affirming for people that are questioning their sexuality, and it would be good for people who are friends or relatives of someone who is asexual and don't know anything about it. It also really emphasizes a spectrum of feelings, which I like. It's not just asexuality is this. It's asexuality could be all of these different things. Cons are that the info was really basic, so this book is really good for people that are just starting out with this. It also got really repetitive at times, because at the beginning of the book it goes through all the basics, and then at the end of the book it goes through all those again, as from the perspective of someone that's not asexual. So if you're reading the whole book straight through, everything is said twice. I feel like the book couldn't decide if it was for Aro Ace people or if it was for friends of Aro Ace people, because there was a lot of what not to say to your Aro Ace friends, what not to do, what not to mention, what you can do, which is nice, but it's not really helpful for someone that is ace or aro. I'm like jumping into terms here and not explaining what anything means, but ace is asexual, aro is aromantic, if you didn't know. So I ended up giving this 3 stars. Next up was Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is adult urban fantasy. It follows our main character Maggie, who has special abilities related to her family that were woken in her after a traumatic experience in her past, and she uses those abilities to hunt monsters. It takes place in the near future after devastating earthquakes and climate change caused massive flooding, so huge portions of the United States are no longer habitable, and it destroyed some infrastructure. Pros of this book are Rebecca Roanhorse is Native American, and she uses a lot of cultural inspiration for gods and monsters that are in this book, which is really interesting. Maggie, our main character, is a great complex female character, and her friendship and potential future relationship with the other lead character, Kai, was really interesting. Kai is super adorable, and I loved seeing the way their relationship grew from the beginning to the end of the book. Maggie and Kai kind of reluctantly partner up, and that's an interesting dynamic. The storytelling was super fast-paced. I read this in just a few days, and the descriptions of magic in this book was really interesting. My only cons are that the writing was a little weak at some points. There were some like repeated statements, like things that didn't need to be said, but I gave it 4 stars, and I'm really hopeful for the next book, which comes out I think in May, so I'm really looking forward to that. Next is The Steel Prince by V.E. Schwab. This is an adult fantasy graphic novel. It is sort of a prequel to the Shades of Magic series if you've read those, and even if you had it, this is still readable. It's set up so that you don't need any of the information from Shades of Magic for this to make sense. So it follows one of the main characters in Shades of Magic, Rai. This follows his father when he was young. Pros of this are, again, the art style. Like, even the cover art is amazing. But like, this first page is some background information about the world. So it's a little world building page, but I just love the way it's laid out and the way the sequencing happens. And there are a few pages where that happens. Let me find another one. It's probably like on the first 3 pages. Yes. So just the way it shows movement and time from one frame to the next. It's just so great. And I'm just now getting into comics, so seeing stuff like that is really elevating the experience, I feel. Because one of the downsides I have with a lot of comics is that you just can't fit a lot of storyline in something so short with so much art. So the art itself is really important to me, and it really affects my enjoyment of a comic. We have 2 sort of main characters in these first 4 volumes. This is a bind-up of the first 4 volumes of the Steel Prince comics, Maxim and Isra. And I actually think Isra is a more interesting character, but Maxim is sort of growing on me by the 4th one. In Shades of Magic, Maxim becomes sort of an antagonist, so it's really interesting to see where he's coming from. It sort of humanizes him and helps you understand how he rationalizes some of his decisions in Shades of Magic. And yeah, my only downside with this was a problem I have with most comics, in that not a lot happens. You don't get very far. But I'll definitely be picking up the next 4 volumes. I don't live anywhere near a comic book shop, so I can only get these when the bind-ups come out at local bookstores. I gave that 4 stars. Next is A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. This is an adult horror. It follows a family from one perspective, the perspective of Mary, who is one of the children in this family, as her sister sort of devolves into schizophrenia, and their father falls deeper and deeper into sort of religious superstition, and he thinks she's possessed. So it follows this family as they try to figure out what's wrong with their daughter and what they can do to help her. But also they have financial struggles. They're a middle-class family. The father has recently lost his job, so it's kind of following that whole complex situation. Pros of this book are that some of the scenes were pretty creepy. They made my skin crawl a little bit, and I really loved, there's sections of this book that are told in the present or future timeline of Mary as an adult, and it also follows this blog that's doing a breakdown of this televised show that they ended up signing up for in order to cover the cost of some of Marjorie's treatments. And I think the blog entries were some of the most interesting parts. Cons for this book is that I didn't think it was scary at all. And it's a horror book, so I wanted to be scared. I felt no tension. There wasn't a lot of buildup of tension. The majority of the book is written from a child's perspective, which I'm kind of discovering I don't enjoy. It doesn't bother me in small doses, but at least half this book is written from like a 9-year-old's perspective, which is a little annoying just because it's a 9-year-old and like little kids can be annoying. And you also question the reliability of her story because she was so young when everything happened. I thought a lot of it was predictable and I wasn't really shocked by anything that happened throughout the book, and there was an ambiguous ending, but ambiguous like on the last page in the last line of the book that I feel is such a cheap ending. So cheap. And I read his most recent book, which was The Cabin at the End of the World, which also had an ambiguous ending, but because the rest of the book you're questioning everything that's happening so much, I thought the ambiguous ending made sense, and in this one it just felt cheap. Another problem I had was with the writing. Sometimes he has these weird like similes, and I'm gonna read it because I rolled my eyes so hard. First of all, the very first page, it starts with, quote, "This must be so difficult for you, Meredith," end quote. And then, best-selling author Rachel Neville wears a perfect fall ensemble, etc. But like, this is told in first person, and nobody thinks about people like that in their own head. They just don't. And the second example, which is just on page 5, says, "Her hat settles in her lap, a fragile bird that has been bullied from its nest," which is so ridiculous and such a weird comparison for such an innocuous thing. Like, why do we need so much attention drawn to the fact that she put her hat on her lap? It's just weird. So even on page 5 of this book, I was like, okay, this is strange. But I loved The Cabin at the End of the World so much that I thought maybe the story would make up for it, and it didn't. I gave it 2 stars. I'm doing a lot of talking about all of these books today, and I'm worried that this video is going to be really long and a pain to edit. Next is Blank Spaces by Cass Lennox, and I read this as an ebook through my library. It is a new adult, I would say new adult romance mystery, kind of. So this follows 2 main characters, and we see from both of their perspectives. Vaughn, who is kind of a fairly privileged, well-off guy working in an art gallery. There's been a theft from his gallery, the 3rd in a year. So when this happens, they call in their insurance agency who's doing an investigation because of the frequency of these thefts. And our second main character is the insurance investigator, Jonah. So this is a romance, so it follows the 2 of them as their relationship develops. And one of our main characters, Vaughn, is asexual, and our other main character is almost hypersexual. So they have a lot of hurdles to overcome. The pros of this book are that the ace rep is really good, and in this book, Vaughn discovers the term and finally has some way to describe himself, and his discovery of that term and the research he does makes a lot of sense and seemed really genuine. And some of the romantic moments between Vaughn and Jonah were really sweet and cute, like good feelings. And then Jonah's backstory was really well developed and fleshed out. Those are my only pros. The cons are that the mystery element of this book is not a mystery at all. You know who done it within the first few chapters at the very least. Vaughn's backstory is really underdeveloped. You don't get a good look at his past. It does discuss his family a little bit and discuss his friends, most of which are assholes. Like, his friends are not good or kind or supportive in any way. It's kind of confusing why he chooses to hang out with them at all. And his friends are also super judgmental. And Jonah, who is our hypersexual character, which is like totally fine, have all the sex you want, do what makes you happy, but because you are reading some of this from Jonah's perspective, and you know what he's thinking and you know how he's feeling, I feel like it's really obvious that Jonah needs therapy, and some of the decisions he's making regarding his sexuality are rooted in very negative places, and none of those issues are really confronted, and I think that's a problem. At times he seemed like intentionally self-destructive and did things that he later saw in a regretful light, but repeated those actions anyways. And yeah, like Jonah, he needed therapy, seriously. There are several times where our asexual character Vaughn, after making it clear he doesn't want a sexual relationship with Jonah or any kind of relationship, so he thinks, where Jonah comes on to him anyways, even after Vaughn has made it clear he's not interested, which I think is a problem. And I'm getting a little spoilery here, so I'll put a label down if you want to skip the spoilery parts. But after Jonah and Vaughn decide to try a romantic relationship, Jonah pushes Vaughn's boundaries immediately. Like within the same conversation, he's already pushing boundaries regarding Vaughn's sexuality. And again, I think that's a problem, and it's not confronted in the book, and it's kind of treated as like a cute haha Jonah likes sex, but Vaughn doesn't, and it feels like a line that shouldn't be crossed in a romance. But yeah, in the end, I do think I think their relationship needed more time to develop before they decided to make it so solid. I'm like now straight up ranting about this book, but like this book Vaughn's character arc, a lot of his time is spent developing like basically a backbone, standing up for himself, making his needs clear. And at the end of the book, it's like Jonah basically sabotages all of that and Vaughn just goes along with it, and yeah, that's not good either. So I give this 2 stars. Maybe it should be 1 star, but I give it 2 stars because the ace rap itself was good. I wish the rest of it had been better. If you have any recommendations for like cute, fluffy ace romances, let me know. My god, I've been filming for 40 minutes. I'm not even halfway through. Okay, next. Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal. This is an adult sci-fi alternate history kind of book. It follows our main character, Elma, who is she's like a math genius. She's a mathematician. In World War II, she was a WASP pilot, so she has flight experience, and in 1952, there is a meteorite that strikes Earth, causing what turns out to be an extinction event. So the space program is expanded and pushed more quickly so that they can try to colonize another planet in order to survive. And Elma wants to be an astronaut. She wants to go into space, and this book sort of follows her journey as she tries to get there. So pros, Elma is great. She is super confident in her abilities. She is very intelligent and very driven, but she's also reasonably hesitant in some situations because of past experiences. Obviously, this takes place in the 50s, so there was a lot of sexism at the time. So because of some of the sexism she experienced in the past, she's hesitant in certain situations, and she experiences a lot of anxiety when speaking in public or having any sort of publicity on her. I also found that the depictions of sexism in here seemed very realistic. Obviously, I wasn't alive in the 50s, but based on research, they seem realistic. Sort of this sexism disguised as protecting fragile women. I also loved the realistic anxiety rep and the discussions of medication for treating anxiety. It talked about like internalized shame for seeking help for anxiety. There were a lot of female friendships. The relationship between Elma and her husband, Nathaniel York, was so sweet. Nathaniel is very supportive. Elma is also Jewish, and she faces some judgment and anti-Semitism from that. It also discusses her religion a little in depth. I mean, because of this meteorite, she loses some family, and there's discussions of grief and the sort of religious grieving process for Jewish people, and that was really interesting. My cons are that I felt like the grief aspect of this could have been discussed a little more, and just how it impacted her life day to day a little more after this sort of grieving period was over. And more could have been done to discuss the way race played a part in this. Elma wants to be the first female astronaut, but at the same time, Black people in the US, and the US is sort of leading this charge, are treated poorly, and there are no Black men or women in the space program, even though there are people that are technically qualified. Basil, I'm trying to talk. Please. So it does talk about race a little bit in the book, but I feel like our main character, seeing as she's fictional, could have made more of a stand, or a little more could have been done with that than was in this book. My other con and my biggest con were the sex scenes, because they were so cringy. And like, they're mostly fade to black. There's nothing explicit in here, but there were like a bunch of space euphemisms, and there was a lot of like rockets comparisons, and like they literally said, "We are go for launch" once, and it's just like, ugh, so unsexy, it's funny. but I gave it 4 stars and I would recommend it to anyone that's into sci-fi. Next is The Wicker King by Kay Ingram, and this is a young adult sort of contemporary magical realism vibe. I read this as an ebook from my library, and it follows 2 main characters, August and Jack. We read this from August's perspective, and it follows them as Jack starts seeing things. He starts hallucinating or seeing another dimension with strange creatures, and he thinks there's some kind of mission they have to complete to save this other place. And August and Jack's friendship is very codependent. They both come from neglectful homes, so they lean on each other a little too hard and it becomes unhealthy. And it follows them as they're kind of exploring this other world and figuring out what they can do to save it and themselves. Pros of this book were character development, because both of the characters were very well developed and they made a lot of sense with their backstories. The writing is very atmospheric and poetic, which isn't something I love, but it was well done. And then the descriptions of the other world were also really interesting. There was also little inset pictures like of characters and drawings that the characters made of this other world and their plans, and I thought those were really interesting. And the author did a really good job of sort of building this kind of dread throughout the book. You know something really bad is going to happen. And here's where I'm gonna get like a little spoilery, so again, I'll put a warning down there. But my cons for this book are that I think the switch from unhealthy codependent relationship to healthy, loving, romantic relationship was way too fast, and there was no nuance in that transition. Okay, spoilery part is over. My other con was at the beginning of the book, and this is like a personal pet peeve of mine, so maybe not everyone will hate it, but I really hate especially young adult romances or younger adult romances, and specifically romances that aren't male-female. And there's this scene where you can tell, or at least this is how it feels to me, there's a scene towards the beginning of the book that's set up to read like a sex scene at the beginning with no graphic details or anything, and then haha, just kidding, it's not really that. And I hate that, because it makes like the sex scenes between people that aren't male-female into this like funny haha joke, and it just bugs me. I just don't like it. So I ended up giving this 3 stars. I'm not opposed to picking up another one of Kay Ingram's books, but I didn't love this one. Okay, we're getting there. 2 more. Next is The Changeling by Victor LaValle, and I read this as an audiobook from my library. It is an adult magical realism, almost fairy tale. It reads like a fairy tale. Primarily we follow Apollo Kagwa and his wife, Emma Valentine. It's so hard to describe the plot of this book without just giving everything away. So in the beginning of the book, we follow Apollo just coming into himself, this like almost coming of age at the very beginning of the book, as he's making a career for himself. Then he meets Emma, and it's sort of a love story, and they get married and have a child, and it's very sweet and romantic. And then Emma commits this like unspeakable crime, and after that we're following Apollo as he tracks her down to find out why she would do such a terrible thing. And then it gets fantastical. Like, one thing I really liked about this book were those tonal shifts. Like, the beginning was sweet and romantic, coming of age, and then there's like a nice sweet romance, and then have sort of like regular family dynamics and family problems, and then suddenly we're investigating a crime, and then it gets really intense magically, like, and I really loved those changes, but I could see why someone wouldn't. Apollo as a character was really great. I mean, even when he was being a dick, even when he was doing things wrong, I was rooting for him. I wanted him to succeed in his goals. I wanted him to reunite with his wife. I wanted him to work everything out. Even when he was kind of in the wrong, there's a lot of that. Something I love in books is when they talk about other books, and Apollo as a career is a rare and used books salesman, so there's a lot of talk of rare books and book hunting, things like that, and I really enjoy that. He also wove in like some fairy tale stories, which were interesting, drawing a lot of parallels between our actual narrative and the fairy tale narratives. My only cons are that the middle kind of meandered a bit. They could have been shorter, and there were quite a few loose ends that could have been wrapped up a little neater. So I gave this 4 stars. And the last book I have to talk about is The Wife Between Us by Sarah Pekkanen and Greer Hendricks. This is an adult thriller. mystery. At the beginning, we're following two perspectives. Vanessa, who is recently divorced from Richard and whose life is kind of spiraling. You get this impression that she has an alcohol problem. She's obsessed with this new person that Richard is dating, and she just can't pull her life together. And then we also follow Nellie, who is the young woman who is now engaged to Richard. Pros for this are the writing was really engaging, and the plot was fast-paced. And the first plot twist, there's a plot twist about halfway through here that really shocked me. I didn't see it coming, and I love when that happens. The cons are that the twist toward the end was kind of predictable, and then there's another twist at the very, very end that I thought was a little contrived. And I think maybe I should just stop picking up thrillers about women that are recently divorced from shitty men. Like, I'm just really tired of that narrative. I ended up giving this 3 stars. Okay, finally, done ranting. Let me know in the comments what you read this month, or if you've read any of these and have any feelings about them. I post book-related videos every Wednesday, so subscribe if you want to keep up. If you like this video, hit like. If you want to talk more, you can find me on Twitter at Kelsey Reads. Otherwise, I'll see you all next week.